Welcome to Smart in the City, the Babel podcast where we bring together top actors in the smart city arena, sparking dialogues and interactions around the stakeholders and themes most prevalent for today's citizens and tomorrow's generations. I am your host, Tamlin Shimizu, and I hope that you will enjoy this episode and gain knowledge and connections to drive the change for a better urban life. Smart in the City is brought to you by Babel Smart Cities. We enable processes from research and strategy development to co-creation and implementation. To learn more about us, please visit the Babel platform at babel-smartcities.eu. So yes, today I'm sitting in one of my favorite cities actually in the world, Amsterdam, and I'm going to let you all in on a conversation that I'm about to have with the Chief Digital Officer at the City of Rotterdam, talking about all things digital and his wealth of knowledge and experience from past 20 years or so, maybe longer. I don't know. We'll hear all about it. So yes, so please give a warm welcome to Bas Boorsma. As I said, he's the CDO of Rotterdam. He's also an urban innovator, a professor of practice at Thunderbird School of Global Management, and staying busy, obviously. He's also the author of a new digital deal. I'm sure you are all interested, as I am now, to dig into his thoughts. So welcome to the show, Bas.
Thank you so much, Tamlin. It's tremendous to be part of this.
I'm really excited for the conversation. We were just chatting before this, and we can relate on so many different levels, and I'm dying to get to know more. So without further ado, we're going to dive into some challenges in this episode, I'm sure, talking a little bit more nitty gritty. But I would like to start us off on a positive note. So one of the podcast segments that we do here is one called Inspire Us. Very lovely. So we ask our guests for a story, a quote, or anything that has inspired you recently to keep going and keep motivated. Do you have something in mind?
Oh boy, you didn't even give me a chance to think about that. There's many that come to mind. First of all, I think that one quote that I like to share with people I work with, colleagues, my students, is that if you're living in times of radical change, if you're living a design shift, learn to be comfortable at being uncomfortable.
That's really good.
It is a wisdom that really should actually hang over your bed, because if you are living a system shift, and I think we are living in times of a system shift, then you've got to accept that nothing in the future is going to look like what it was in the past. You're going to be uncomfortable, and you've got to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
That's good. I want to talk in this episode then about some times that you were uncomfortable, maybe. Because I feel like you're a person that's comfortable with everything. I don't know. You're just such a natural born talker. You're very charismatic with everything. So what makes you uncomfortable now?
Right now, nothing at all, except for the concern that someone might walk into this room and say, I've reserved this room, stuff like that. And that would upset our recording. That's the only thing that would actually have me uncomfortable right now. No, I can be very uncomfortable, but these are things that can typically be mitigated, or you can predict them and you can see them happening. And the more you can see that, the more you can actually be comfortable at being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think actually starting this podcast, I think, was a bit uncomfortable for me at the beginning. And now I've gotten so comfortable with it. It really doesn't take that long to start being comfortable with things that you are anxious about or uncomfortable. So you just got to get over the first little hurdle, I think, and then move forward. So,
and it's always like that. I think that's the source of energy. It's like if you're going to keynote somewhere, you're like that 1 minute before you hit the stage. Yeah. There is this sense of nerve, but you got to actually embrace it. It's got to become your friend. And then you're in the zone. And once you're in the zone, you've got that anxiety under control, and it feeds you. It becomes positive. And that's actually a nice thing.
And you still get that with all your keynotes. You still get the little, good.
That's healthy.
That doesn't go away.
I need it. I need that energy.
Okay. Good to know. So I want to give also the listeners, and I also want to know your story, your background. Who are you? Where did you come from? And what drives you?
Well, that's a tall question, because I'm not that young anymore. I'm 53 years old. I was born in the Netherlands. I currently reside in the Netherlands. I started out my adult life, going to university and taking the longest road to unemployment, Tamlin. I actually studied Asian history. and all my professors said, are you absolutely confident you want to do this? Because the chances of you actually landing on a job are going to be slim. But interestingly, I've obviously never been quiet. I never was without work in any point of my working life. I happened to have lived in Cambodia for 3.5 years when the civil war was still raging there. And I was part of the United Nations mission. And living there amidst violence, efforts to maintain peacekeeping efforts, that has completely reframed who I was as a person. It actually provided me with the framework of values and ideas that took me further in life. It's got nothing to do with digital, nothing to do with cities, but it's a very important part of my life. Since then, since returning from Cambodia in the mid-90s, I was onto several jobs, always with Asia in the back of my mind, working with various governments in Southeast Asia. And then 9/11 happened, and that changed my life quite a bit because all of my customers, or most of them, just flipped. They said, we've got a major crisis. No one was traveling. 9/11 was followed by SARS, the lung disease, like COVID-1, so to speak. and that, again, cost me customers. And I ended up working in a digital space ever since. That was 2001. It's 21 years later, and it's always been urban innovation, digitalization, and the incredible design shift that we're living. And that is the professional part. That's the professional story of my life.
I love that story. I also relate to you a little bit because before I started with smart cities, I don't have as much experience now, the 20 years that you have now in the digital space. But before that, I was actually also working in Asia, in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan. So in a different topic, in women's education.
Very good.
And in very rural areas, not in cities. So I've flipped the switch a little bit, but I still carry those lessons with me. So I also relate with you on that.
Amazing. That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So I would love to ask you. So when I first met you in Copenhagen, you said, I love doing podcasts. Let's do it. And I love the enthusiasm. And you told me about a podcast that you did where you outlined 10 lessons. And that was like your favorite podcast to date. Hopefully now this one, will be the favorite, but I'll share it. I'll share the title also. But since then, I'm wondering, so that was about a year ago, I think, that you did
correct.
that.
It's about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah. And so in the last 1.5 years, could you tell us a number 11 lesson that you think you've learned in the last little bit, like a recent one?
Well, what has been very important is that I haven't been a CDO to the city of Rotterdam for that long. And so that 1.5 years has by and large corresponded with that same time. And what I have learned is, first of all, that so many people that do not work for public sector, they take kind of a dim view as to what people in public sector do. And there's a kind of idea that people in public sector somehow work less hard than in private sector. And what I've really discovered, how that's not the case. I've actually come to admire the persistence, the resilience, the hard work that so many people put in public sector. Public sector is simply also a very, very challenging environment, or it can be, where it's sometimes very difficult to deliver on the things where you as a person or as a team want to deliver on, perhaps more so than in private sector. Sometimes the output is just difficult to arrive at. But I've come to be really, really impressed with what I've seen in public sector. At the same time, I got reinforced in some of my beliefs that public sector is partially broken and that we actually need to rethink how we actually implement those urban innovations, what process that looks like, and how we can best work with local and regional and potentially national public sector entities to get the job done, because we have an enormous job ahead of us.
That's definitely true. What are the main things that you think needs to change then with government? What's broken and how do we fix it?
Well, I think that the entire governance and the way things are organized are simply not up to the job. If going back to parliamentary democracy itself, having an open, indirect representation model, that has like a 250 year type of background, and it was born in a time when people, shied away from long distances. If you'd live in Maryland and you'd have to go to Washington D.C. or Virginia and Washington D.C. or you'd live in Twente in the Netherlands, you'd have to come out to The Hague. Those distances were very, very real. They were very substantial, and therefore indirect representation was obviously fantastic. That was the best way to actually run a democracy. I don't think that's the case anymore. Also, I think that people are well informed. They got all of these sources of information, and people don't want to be bullied into some type of a corner anymore. People are out there with their opinion. You've got to heed that opinion. So you need different tools to work with all of these changes. And government in general has been very, very slow to adapt to those new circumstances, for sure. Another thing I think is that if you look at the major transitions that our communities are facing across the globe, from Nepal to Peru, then, let's say circular economy, digitalization, energy transition, climate change in general. If you think of all of these major transitions, then there is hardly ever a department that is just completely mandated to run either one of them, let alone connect them. You've got economic affairs, you've got citizen services. These are the typical type of silos within which it's been organized, which means that even if you got groups of people that have their own quiet pockets to work on these innovations, that they may or may not be taken fully serious, and they're sitting in their little part of a silo somewhere half mandated. And that's something that can simply no longer be the case. It's 2 to 12 when it comes to climate change. We are facing a mass extinction level event. What's the right term? I always forget how it's exactly called, but we're really on the edge. We have no time. We have no time to lose. And we got to get ourselves organized to be much more on the game, to actually deliver on the solutions that we need, which means we need a much more of a moonshot scenario in terms of how we actually drive innovation forward, how we orchestrate the governance around that, how we match public and private sector and investors and academia, not just in the typical quadruple helix models as we like to propose it to, let's say, the European Commission, because that becomes a politically correct thing. No, now serious. How do we reorganize that? How do we get our act together? Because local government is not up to the job. And then final point, I find that still most people working in so many government entities are somewhat on the senior side. They're not old. I am not going to put on that label on them, but there's a lot of people that have been in that role forever. And what I think is what I see from my own students, I admire them. I admire my students because they are somehow, somewhere more up to the job. They just look at complexity. They look at interdisciplinary challenges and issues in a fresh way, much more dynamic. Their ability to collaborate, they have grown up in an internet centric era. They think differently, they design differently, they collaborate differently. So there's no more time for a traditional generational handover of power. We need people, both young and old, in that boardroom, and not to kind of have the quintessential workshop, let us tell you what we do. No, we need them at the decision-making points. We need intergenerational teams that are going to solve these challenges together. Government is nowhere close to getting organized in that way, and we need it now.
That's you touched on so many points there that I resonate so much with, honestly, that this urgency that we have. Do you write about some of these topics in your book?
I do. The one thing is my book is about digital, first of all. It talks about a new digital deal where I think that's the whole idea that we need to do so much more in order to make digitalization work for us in the way that we want it and that is best for humanity. That just following, the next levels of technological changes is not good enough. I always say, you can choose. You can be in that wild river in a canoe, and you can either decide to be in that canoe with a pedal or without a pedal. Without a pedal, you're going to crash into something at one point, and then it's going to be bad. Or you're going to say, well, I'm going to navigate this. And for that, we need a plan. However, there's another component to the book, and which really brings together the other transition journeys. Digitalization is not just about digitizing a few more things, bringing in some more technology. It's about a design shift. It's about doing things more distributed and moving away from the old centralized way of organizing things, which is something, quite frankly, that we inherited from the previous industrial revolutions. We must embrace these new designs, the distributed designs, in order to organize ourselves better, design better, but also to think of how we actually tackle energy management better, for instance. And those designs, which have really been afforded to us by digital, are going to be critical if humanity is to survive.
Yeah. You also interview, I think, 22 different leaders within your book, right? What were the commonalities that really spoke to you? Was it these topics that you're talking about now, or is there something else that you want to highlight that you were like, wow, all of these leaders are saying the same thing. They're all leading us in the same direction. Or were they all different points? What was your experience with that?
Well, there were certainly a number of commonalities. One of the most important things, I think, is that everyone felt that there is a need to actually arrive at a new digital deal. That actually this is not, if we want to harvest the best that digitalization affords, then we've got to actually come up with a plan. You just leaving it by itself is not going to get us there. And with that comes a sense of urgency and responsibility and accountability. Mm-hmm. And I remember one particular person stating it most eloquently, but it kind of resonated with the others, and it kind of lined up with what a lot of other people were saying, what a lot of other leaders were saying, is that this person was saying, there's a lot of people that feel we're moving too fast with all of this technological change. And I think, he said, we're not moving fast enough. We've got to make a much larger effort to educate, to have everyone on board. We've got to actually embrace those design shifts much faster if we want to get where we need to be. We've got to move much faster if we're not going to arrive at the next series of what is going to be much more complex digital divides, because those digital divides are going to hurt. They hurt today. If you don't address them, they're going to hurt more tomorrow, and they become more complex. So I completely second that. That is a great point of view. That point of view I heard echoed in various other interviews, people that I did interview for the book, indeed, and it's a great call out.
Yeah, and how are you? So you have all these great ideas and theories and all of this great input from these leaders. How are you using that now in your role at Rotterdam?
Well, in several ways. So it's great to be rich on vision, but you obviously need to follow up on that in terms of actual practical stuff. If you have a vision without actual practical implementation, then you're living a daydream. I'd also say, and people that would argue that we can be a little bit too much on the philosophical and visionary side. If you have action without that type of vision and philosophy, you're having a nightmare. So, we need to be somewhere between the daydream and the nightmare and implement and make sure that the balance is out there. I think one of the things that is important is to continue to educate people around you and to have people understand that the transition that we're experiencing and that we're having right now, what I call digitalization, is not the same as digitization. Digitization is going from analog to digital. And we've been doing that for the past 40 years, say a library archive, having more computers on people's desks. A lot of people still think that digital is all about that. I'm saying no. Digitalization is about the design shift. And these are some of the examples how this is going to affect you. And then there's projects. I mean, if I look at my own work in Rotterdam over the past 1.5 years, it's all been about education. It's how do we actually bridge those digital divide, plural digital divides. How do we bridge those? How can we bring in, how can we stop trying to do this just by ourselves, but leverage partnerships much better in order to get us where we need to be. We just recently announced such a partnership with some very large corporates, one very big tech company that are sitting on great curriculum, great content, making that available for 15,000 workers in the port area of Rotterdam. That's fantastic partnership. That's the way to go. But obviously, we got great schools in Rotterdam, and that collaborate on all of this. So how do we push this? How do we address the 55-plus-year-old group of society? How do we bring upskilling to them? What does that mean? What does it mean to actually rethink our thoughts around digital rights? Because we need to have those in place. Obviously, there are great international charters. I, however, do not believe there's one size fits all. So what does a digital rights charter look like that has been made for, by, and for the benefit of the city of Rotterdam? And so all of these things have been on our desk, have been worked on. We are actually producing. There are great results to them. Other things that have been elementary is, what does digital inclusion look like for tomorrow? What's happening today, and what should we be focusing on tomorrow in order to ensure we're not just solving today's problem without thinking what tomorrow's problem is going to be, and to find that problem is going to be much larger. So the entire set of teams that we've been working on in the city of Rotterdam have been focused on topics like these with actual concrete output.
Wow, big questions that you're asking, and hopefully getting some answers. But it seems so... there just seems such big questions. Like, where do you start? How do you figure out where to start on some of these big questions? Because you can ask these massive questions, and it's hard sometimes to bring it to the ground, right? And say, okay, this is the roadmap of where we need to go to get to some answers to those questions. How do you frame that? How do you work that out when you're doing these processes?
Well, first of all, you got to allow yourself to fail up to a significant point, which is difficult in public sector. In public sector, there is generally no license to fail.
Yeah.
And you've got to simply build that license to fail for yourself, and actually, come up with a warning to people around you. This may blow up in your faces. Just you be aware.
Politicians don't like that.
Politicians don't like that. But then, mind you, those that need to actually respond on Wall Street on quarterly numbers don't like things blowing up in their faces either.
Yeah.
So big tech can be very, very wary of innovations that they don't fully control. So, on all sides, we see this issue. But you can actually create your own license to fail up to a point. So that's one. The second thing is to do proper design thinking in whatever you do. And this has been kind of a fancy thing to say as of recent. Everyone is talking about design thinking. It's not the magic bullet, but it is a critical ingredient in terms of designing your policies, solutions, business architectures, technology architectures, understanding what does purpose look like? What is it you're actually trying to do? Check your own assumptions. Don't fear to go back to the drawing board, not just once, not just twice, but perhaps 10 times. Bring in your potential future enemies. To quote The Godfather, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Because whether it's cybersecurity or those nasty ambassadors of data ethics and so many others that could potentially be your enemy, bring them in early into your design stages of what you do, because they will actually collaborate with you. They will enjoy being part of the process. And once you get that going as a collaborative exercise, boy, you're so much better set up for success. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there's always the question of the financials, the budget. But here is my conviction. Obviously, there are things which are typically directly into the realm of public sector, and you need to create budget. However, there are so many things where, as a city and as a municipality, you're going to somehow potentially co-invest in what's being created. But be mindful that so many other first users, anchor tenants of whatever you're going to create, may actually be other entities than yourself, which means that as a municipality, not necessarily do you have to be the buying center. Perhaps you could be a modest buying center or a first tenant to whatever is being created. But just make sure that you're mindful of the other roles that you could actually embrace as local government. That could be you're the neutral orchestrator or the traditional regulator role, but also as a co-investor. And I'm personally, Tamlin, I'm a huge fan of Mariana Mazzucato's mission economy thinking, because government has taken up that role as an investor, as a risk taker in the past. And Mariana Mazzucato in her book, often looks at the Apollo program going to the moon, where government obviously took up a risk in making all of that happen because the market didn't exist. The same with the internet. Go back to ARPANET. That was government funded. Even mRNA vaccines. I mean, that is really, that came out of DARPA type of investments, government funded. So government can rethink, rediscover what its role can be as an investor, but also as a collaborator of a larger ecosystem where these things happen. And the element of mastery is for anyone that sits in that CDO role to figure out how you bring that together.
That's really powerful. And I've actually never heard the government as an investor been said before. And I was just thinking when you said that, I was like, why have I never heard that before? Because the government has this power to do that, but I've never heard it before. So thank you for that. I actually was going to ask you too, because I saw your article that was talking about the friends close, but you actually in the article, I think you said keep your presumed friends close, but keep your presumed enemies closer. Can you touch on that? Like, why presumed?
Because there are so many people that will just start out some innovation initiative with a lot of assumptions. And those assumptions can touch on so many things. And a lot of those assumptions may end up being wrong. Any people that's been in the startup business knows this. They know that, they've got a great dream and they're sitting on a bunch of unchecked assumptions. And that's all you've got. So if that's your starting point, then also as a government official or as a CDO or as an innovation leader in the urban innovation space, you're going to have to check, what are your assumptions? Well, this is my circle of my friends. This is a circle of my enemies. Well, check. Because those people that will claim that they're going to be your friend, that they're going to be the big investor, that they're going to, have you believe that their PowerPoint and what they will deliver for your city are going to be true. Check. Again, some of the best and biggest tech companies can be so drunk on their own Kool-Aid that they actually don't know that they cannot deliver on their PowerPoint. Whereas at the same time, you may find that those that you consider your presumed enemies are actually those that could potentially help you in particular phases of what you're doing. Go through that process with the highest degree of honesty that you can possibly bring to the table.
Yeah, good advice. I also wanted to touch back on your point about the license to fail, because I also want to tell you, I was in Helsingborg in the spring, and I was talking with the team there is doing amazing things. So shout out to them. And they were telling me that they have an award ceremony for the biggest fail. And so they actually have created this culture, this license to fail. Do you guys also have an award for the for the biggest fail in Rotterdam or anything that?
We don't, Tamlin. But
you can bring it to them.
But here's a dream that I've been having. I mean, having been in this space for 20 years, I'm a little bit fed up with all of the smart city conferences. There's just too much of it. And I've been organizing a number of those throughout all of those years myself also.
Yeah.
But I've promised myself that there's one thing that I would love to organize. Perhaps you're familiar with the format of the fuck up nights. Sorry for my French.
Urban
I didn't think
Future.
up that word. Right. So I would love to have a fuck up nights on smart city solutions, and where people just come to stage with, radical honesty and have everyone laugh and join into the fun in terms of how they failed. To me, that would be just marvelous. I would love to organize one of those.
Let's do it. I will help you.
All right, cool, deal.
Let's do it together. Yeah, Urban Future Conference has that night, and they're going to be in Stuttgart next year as well. So in our hometown. Cool. So you'll have to come.
Very cool.
Maybe you can also. We're collaborating with them, so maybe we can make that happen there. Actually, so
wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So, lots of amazing things. You're obviously very, very knowledgeable about all these digital solutions, and that's in your role at Rotterdam. But I'm also wondering, so was there a time when you saw digital solutions being used, but analog was really the way to go? Like, have you seen digital solutions been used really poorly, basically?
Oh yes, all of the time. All of the time. I mean, there's so many. For instance, when the Internet of Things angle to smart cities really got serious, we go back. You need to go back like about 10 years, roughly 2012, 2013. This is when people started to debate this in earnest. And at the time, I was working at Cisco, and we worked on the Barcelona engagement, and we had all of these things like smart bus stops and smart waste solutions. And I remember talking to the then mayor of Barcelona, the deputy mayor, and like several years later, when I got to write my book, the man who then used to be the deputy mayor when we launched that collaboration with Cisco in Barcelona, said, "Look, we had that smart waste solutions, and it never really worked because." I actually sat down with one of those drivers. We did the tour of picking up the waste. They were sitting with those iPads, and it was just impractical. It didn't work. And to actually have a sensor in every waste bin was never necessary, because by having a fair sample of waste bins with a sensor, you would get enough data to actually build smart algorithms based on the historic data. You would already have a great pickup round. So it's just one of those little examples of where you see it being used poorly. Another thing is that comes out of that classic smart city portfolio of solution is smart parking. And as I also wrote many times, is smart parking in the way it's being offered to us right now, where you go in and there's a place where you discover in a downtown area and you lock it and you go there. That is a fantastic 21st century solution for a 20th century problem. Because if you think of it down the road, parking in the way we do is simply not going to happen in the ways we do it and not in the quantity that we do it. Think of a fully automated car, driverless. And it's going to be publicly owned, or you don't need to be the owner. But whatever, you have arrived at your destination and you say, go. You can go to the outskirts of town. There is no more need for you. And parking is for free. There's like a huge facility where all of those cars can go. That means that all of those inner city areas and those very ugly parking lots and parking garages can be used for very green type of angles. It can be used for local businesses. It's a rethink in terms of urban planning and spatial planning, just by thinking of parking in that direction. And what I'm saying is an answer to your question is that just an evolved way of parking vehicles slightly more smart, but this is where you really allowed your organization and your planning to be infused by the design think shift. The design shift that's happening as a consequence of digital, which is those cars don't all need to be at a centralized place. They can actually be distributed and go away. We're in the middle of that revolution because people are still trying to kind of get used to this massive design shift. And a lot of people are clearly not aware of this design shift happening. But because of that not being sufficiently happening, people are thinking up great solutions, but those great solutions are being used in a very old school way. And that's really probably not the way to help our cities best.
Really great examples. I love asking that question because there's a lot of people I talk to a lot of people that are smart city like fanatics, right? And then I also talk to people that are quite critical of smart cities as well. I of course fall somewhere in between, I hope, in that I want to show what digital solutions and what technologies can do and innovation, but also show the ways that it can go wrong so that people are aware and educated about and takes a very practical approach to implementing technologies in cities. So I also really want to touch again on your point about you're tired of the smart city conferences. And I actually have this in my notes that I want to ask you about this. that I feel like we both go to a lot of events and conferences and things like that. And one thing that I've noticed again and again is we're talking about the same topics over and over again. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is it just talk to you now? Like, how do we move from how do we put pen to paper and actions into and actions to words? Like, how do we really go from these conversations to implementations faster, actually making these solutions happen?
Well, I think there's a lot of reframing that needs to be done. One of the points is that I actually really don't like the term smart city. And I've mentioned that a lot of time for those people that know me and or that have read my stuff. I don't like the term because smart, what is smart exactly? And cities, well, cities are cool, but not necessarily do we always want to focus on cities. That also would be creating a new digital divide, by leaving out countryside. So that's one thing. We need to shift the framing of it a little bit. The second thing is that a lot of things that become not so smart because they become normal don't receive the same hype. So things that were pitched 10 years ago and that were really novel at the time simply become regular applications and solutions that become mainstream. No one is, having drinking any Kool-Aid on that topic anymore. If you think of say multiple smart energy solutions for buildings, 10 years ago, they were hot. Now they're just mainstream. We're not going to see them at the World Expo in Barcelona because they're mainstream. So in that sense, all of these smart city debates are always sitting on the innovative edge, and they're sitting, they're hopefully they can be addressing the next thing, but people are always waiting for smart cities to happen. And you should actually go back and say, what is it that we were proposing 10, 15 years ago? And then find out that actually many of those things did mature. It just didn't happen in 2 years. It took like 15 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of things come down not to solutions becoming better solutions, but a change of culture. And I think it was Peter Drucker who said, culture has strategy for breakfast, and culture changes per a generation. It doesn't change per a quarter. So, that is simply a fact, and it takes time to get it to that point. Last, I think, and that's another point of where we need to reframe. We need to get out of the solutions mindset. I don't do this frequently, but I will for this time quote former President Richard Nixon, who once said, solutions are not necessarily the answer. And that's, it really applies to this space. You've got to actually look at the problem, not the solution. And for startups, people that want to build a business in the urban innovation space, do not try to think of a solution. Not in month 1. Not in month 2 of your startup, not even in the first 6 months of what you're trying to do. Just study the problem. Another quote, Einstein, who said, if I need to come up and solve something, I'm going to study the problem, and I've got 1 hour to do it. I will use 55 minutes to study the problem and then 5 minutes to actually build the solution. Why don't we actually take that as a starting point for our mindsets in the urban innovation space? That's the thing to do. And it also goes back to the smart city space being a deeply undemocratic type of industry. Who has checked with citizens in the first place, whether they like it? Does this actually talk to their needs? No, we don't need another group of founders of a startup that have fallen in love with their own technology. No, we need to actually study the problems, the problems in the neighborhoods, the climate change related challenges, and then solve them. We can. We've got the minds. We've got the brilliance of so many old and young folks. We've got the money. We've got the methodologies. We can get there. We can solve our gravest problems, but we need to have a shift in terms of how we approach that. And the current ways being approached in the smart city space is not very effective.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And we have this debate internally as well, also with Babel, smart cities. We cannot come up with a better term right now. We have this debate all the time because a lot of us also don't like this term, but it's just the most generally accepted term is the problem. So we'll talk more about that soon. I just want to give you the floor now. You've talked about really great topics, but you're so passionate about many different topics. And I always like to give the floor to people like you. Actually, most of my interviewees are very passionate about topics. So is there anything else that you really want to say today that you haven't gotten the opportunity?
Well, there are things that are so much in my heart and on my mind that I have frequently shared, but that are really worth resharing, and I'm very passionate about. I mean, in the past several minutes of you and me discussing where we are with the urban innovation space, I have been stressing how we're in the middle of a design shift. But there's 2 points to that design shift. One is we are living that design shift. We're going from a centralized way of being organized, central government, central inoculation programs, centralized time zones, centralized retirement schemes, things that we did not have before our previous old industrial revolutions, centralized modes of production, Henry Ford. I mean, all of that centralized to make way for dramatically networked, distributed ways of organizing things. And that gives us, that is a challenge, but it also gives an opportunity to actually solve things that we cannot solve through the old centralized way of organizing things. And I think the entire climate change challenge that we're facing is a pointing case. We will need to rethink how we collaborate, to my earlier point, on how government operates and how it can team together. I'm a big fan of something that's still very experimental, but it's called the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, which essentially takes on a very cooperative structure. It can be a legal entity. Like in Europe, you would have the I think they typically use the French term for it, the Coopérative Innovative Européenne, of Société Innovative Européenne. And the idea being that you have a commercial way of organizing a cooperative and actually organize yourself that way. But what a DAO does on top of that is that everything has been fully digitalized. From the dashboarding, the tokenization of the different value that people bring within that environment. So now you can have, like, let's say, a startup accelerator and venture build program where you bring in investors, where you bring in startups, where you bring in expertise, and everyone is somewhere in that universe, and you can see exactly, highly transparently so, what value each and every one is bringing. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to organize differently. The same for how we organize democracy, the new tools that we need to actually keep democracy alive, because our old tools are simply not up to the job. Look at the pushback that we see with regard to democratically elected governments. People are no longer trusting the institutes. People are pushing back. And we need to have different tools through which people can partner, involve themselves, share their points of view. And I think the only way to do that is just to do that dramatically networked and distributed, and actually tokenize whatever we can tokenize, dashboard stuff, and to have this go all the way. This is, I think, something that a lot of people will need to get used to. And it's not going to work from day one, but this is the shift that we're living. And I'm sure that it's part of the toolbox of solutions and tools that we're going to need to fix our futures. So I think that's something I'm very passionate about. Another thing, and I'm really going to get very, very philosophical now, right up to the point of it almost being spiritual. Have you once observed a large group of birds up in the air, like 1,000 birds, and the sun is almost setting, and it's one of those beautiful summer evenings, and you're observing this group of birds, and they collectively decide to flip suddenly to the right or to the left. And it's been scientifically proven that the time that is required for the bird to observe that the bird to their left is about to flip, process the information in their own brain, and then to turn that into action and flipping themselves cannot be attributed by actually going through that regular observing, it's in my brains now and I make that move. They would always be too slow. What typically those birds actually get into is kind of a biosphere consciousness or a group consciousness. They get to that level where they operate. When I look at younger generations of people that concern themselves with climate change, I observe biosphere consciousness. These people do not have to explain to each other that we're in deep trouble, that we're really seriously in deep trouble. They seem to be completely aligned. They carry that sense of collective urgency, as a group, as a team. This is where we can and need to go to. all of us, whether young or old, we need to actually get into that mode of biosphere consciousness. What can you do about it? Well, first of all, let go of the most centralized ways of organizing yourself. Get into more network patterns of getting organized. This is where I think the network paradigm, this massive shift we're having, is not just a technical thing. And it's not just an easy pattern of being organized, although it is an actual physical design. But it even comes down to how your brains are framed to collaborating, to communicating, right to the level where you could say this is becoming a spiritual thing. And that's fascinating, because imagine that because of the challenges that we face, the sense of urgency, that design shift that we're living, we're getting to a point where we're actually better connected as a species. That would be an up for humanity. So rather than being dark about and gloomy about all the things, there are things that I'm seeing. Again, this is a very philosophical and spiritual type of comment or observation. But this is what I hope is due for humanity. This is where I hope that some of our technologically driven designs and rethinks will get us to, that we're actually shaping up better as human beings, not as robots.
Wow, you just blew my mind, Bas, with that analogy and everything. I really, really love that. I wish I could talk to you for ages now about all of these topics, really sincerely. But I think we have to wrap up soon. But now we move on to one of our fun segments. And then I just have one more question, and then we're done, unfortunately. But are you ready to play a little game?
Depends on what game you had in mind. But I'll promise to be comfortable at being uncomfortable.
Okay, good. It's very easy. Don't worry. It is called Roll with the Punches. Roll with the punches. Answer this or that questions quickly and with your first instincts. Okay.
Sure.
And then at the end, you can explain your answers if you need, okay. But we'll just go quickly through it. All right. Past or future?
Future.
Connected cities or resilient cities?
Resilient cities.
Smart cities or smart communities?
Smart communities.
Academia or government?
I can't do that one.
That's mean, right?
I'll probably go for academia.
Okay. Living labs or innovation districts?
Innovation districts.
The Netherlands or Arizona?
That's unfair. I'll have to sign off my home country because it's given me so much.
I tried to throw in a few kickers for you, just special for you. Do you want to explain any of your answers?
Well, the ones that are really difficult. I mean, connected cities and resilient cities. We need to be resilient. We need to learn how to be resilient amidst all of these changes that we're dealing with. Connected is just being a tool. I mean, it could be a state of being, which is, again, going back to the philosophical component. But I prefer to say, what's the outcome here? We need to be resilient. So that's one. Another that was tough is Arizona versus the Netherlands. And again, Netherlands is my home country. That's where I'm from. But there's a piece of me that has fallen in love with Arizona so dramatically. I love the landscape. I love the beauty of what is called a desert. I don't really quite think it's a desert because it's so alive. It can be so alive in Arizona, but it's so beautiful. But the other hand, there is also a piece of darkness in my mind when I watch Arizona, because I see what Mars was probably like so many millions of years ago, and it's such a dead planet right now. And this is where we could end up being. So that is always when I love hiking, and when I'm out hiking in Arizona, that's also the dark point that comes up in my mind. What else was there?
Academia or government? You had a hard time with that one.
Yeah, so because you
need both.
I've been really on this topic of urban innovation from almost any possible angle: startup, big tech, Cisco, government, network organizations, think and act tanks, European projects. I've seen it from all, and I don't belong in one of those brackets. I fundamentally believe that we can actually make our cities smart and do the right thing for our communities by being interdisciplinary, not just as teams, but in our own beings and our own minds. We need to be interdisciplinary in what we do. So I wouldn't cast myself as an academia. I certainly wouldn't cast myself as government. I'm way too entrepreneurial for that. and so it's really a mix.
Yeah. I can see that in you for sure. I knew that one would trip you up, so that's why I threw it in there. Good. Now is just the last question. It's a question we ask every single guest that comes on, and we've already touched on it. So now I'm interested to see where you take this. It's the question of, to you, what is a smart city?
After 20 years, I'm ever less able to come up with a good answer to it.
It gets harder.
It's getting harder. And right to the point, as I already mentioned, that I really don't like the term for the reasons already mentioned. To me, a smart city is a city which leverages the best of their citizens, the creativity of their citizens, the best of all stakeholders, the best of technology, the best of new designs and old designs, to arrive at a community or a city as a series of communities that is resilient, that is happy, and that is, getting ready for the future and looks at the future with a sense of comfort and a sense of trust and confidence.
Good answer. Yeah, we can debate the topic of smart cities. I also prefer, I've noticed you've been using urban innovation, and I also personally use that a lot, that term as well, but I also want us, the other reason why I don't like it is because of this, the focus is shifting away from cities onto, the focus is still on cities, but also expanding to focus on regions, smaller places. In the UK, they like to say smart places. What do you think? Is there a better term?
To me, it's just cities.
Just cities.
Look, let's just say that in the year 1900, the city of Detroit would have kind of picked up its bragging rights for having so much electrified parts of towns and factories, and have come up with the label for themselves, Detroit, Electric City. That would have been so silly 100 years later. Let's dump the title. It's just about cities and do the right thing in the face of the incredible opportunities and challenges that we face. That's it.
Yeah. We'll consider it. So we're trying to think of these things right now at Babel. Like, how do we really communicate about what we're doing, right? So it's great input. Do you have any last words?
I do have last words. That is that you're the first official channel to communicate that I'll be leaving the city of Rotterdam.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now I got you.
Now you're shocked
hopefully
me.
Comfortable and being uncomfortable.
People always do this to me. I've had multiple podcast episodes where they told me either immediately after that they were leaving the role, or actually immediately after. I've never had someone do it in the podcast though, so that's the first. So what's next? Are you keeping on the education side or what? So
first of all, I love the city of Rotterdam. It's given me an incredible opportunity and something that I always aspire to do. And to have served the city as its chief digital officer, I felt was an amazing opportunity. And it will always be with me. I will also continue to do a lot of things with and for the city of Rotterdam, and I look forward to that future. I also think that there are particular policies taken which are not necessarily in line with what I believe in. And as a CDO, I need to be able to carry the full weight of what a sitting, incumbent city government wants and how it takes further. But there's another component, Tamlin. That's what I want to do. I think I can be using about 30% of my time, talent, and energy within local government in order to achieve what needs to be achieved. I think I can simply be more effective and in some other spaces. And it's a combination of all the things that I've done in the past 20 years. So I look forward to be building a distributed autonomous organization that's really going to be specialized in urban innovation, that's going to co-invest, that's going to build startups, that's going to really take on challenges from the cities that we work with, get their problems and build businesses on top of that, to get into an advisory mode across the world also, but also to bring senior and young talent together and have a database, no, not a database, a community of talent, intergenerational, that we can actually put to work in the places where it's needed most. And it's going to be a lot more, but these are some of the highlights of what we're going to build. I'm doing it with a lot of partners, and I'm excited about where this is going to go.
I'm excited too to hear about it in the future and hopefully be a part of some of the things that you're working on. So all the best to you in all of your endeavors. I'm very excited for you on your next chapter. It's not really, I don't know if you call it closing a chapter or not, but in any case, it's been a super big pleasure to speak with you today. I've rarely seen people so passionate. I see a lot of passionate people, but not quite at the level of you, honestly. So it's been a huge, huge pleasure. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Tamlin. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope we'll be able to continue the conversation in multiple ways.
Yes, would love to continue it. So, and to all of our listeners, don't forget you can always create a free account on babel-smartcities.eu to find out more about smart city projects, solutions, implementations, all these cool things happening. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you at the next stop on the journey to a better urban life.